Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a totally explosive and honestly pretty terrifying chapter of modern history. We're talking about the massive arms race that raged between British authorities and football hooligans throughout the 1970s and 80s. Now, we're not talking about a couple of rowdy fans getting out of hand on a Saturday afternoon. Oh no, this was a multi-decade battle of constantly escalating tactics where the police had to literally invent new ways to manage absolute unchecked chaos.
To really grasp what the police were up against, you have to hear this quote. This is from Jim Murray. He was a lifelong Millwall supporter reporting for a London newspaper. And this is what he wrote after witnessing the infamous 1985 Luton riot. He said, "The scenes before me were ones of open, bloody warfare. They were animals." This is visceral, right? It just instantly drops you into the high-stakes reality of the terraces back then. I mean, imagine being a police officer standing in the gap between thousands of young men who are hurling concrete blocks, coins, and physical seats they've just ripped right out of the stands. It was an absolute crisis.
Section 1. The Epidemic, a Crisis on the Terraces.
So how did it get this bad? Well, by the 1970s, what had started out as localized vandalism completely morphed. It turned into these highly organized, pseudo-military groups that called themselves firms. You had the inner-city firm, the bushwhackers, the headhunters, and they were all out to claim territory and inflict violence. Now, to manage this, authorities first had to understand the root cause. During the economic austerity of the 1980s, unemployment was skyrocketing, growing by up to 30,000 people a month. You had countless young men from working-class backgrounds feeling totally disenfranchised. And in the absence of normal community structures, these violent firms offered them exactly what they were craving: a powerful collective identity, deep camaraderie, and, let's be honest, the intense thrill of organized combat. Loyalty to the firm was everything, because for many of these guys, it was the only place they felt they truly belonged.
The government, however, took a very stark view of this. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher famously described football at the time as a slum sport played in slum stadiums and increasingly watched by slum people. The state viewed this subculture as a severe existential threat to law and order. They actually created an official war cabinet just to combat the issue. So the political pressure was stacked squarely on the police to fix this, and they were expected to fix it fast.
Section 2. Blunt Force, the Archaic Response.
The very first phase of this arms race was totally reactive. The strategy was basically sheer physical force. The police just wanted to wrestle back control of the stadiums using massive manpower and heavy metal. The playbook was simple: herd, segregate, and cage. Fans were essentially treated like prisoners of war. Police would use heavy escorts, sometimes even running special non-stop trains, just to dump away supporters into a city without letting them clash with locals. And once they actually got to the stadium, they were herded into segregated pens enclosed by massive steel perimeter fences, some of which were literally topped with overhangs or barbed wire. It was 100% about physical containment.
£10 million. According to the Taylor Report, that was the staggering cost of policing football in London in just one single year during the late 80s. And the clubs themselves? They were only paying back a tiny fraction of that. This archaic strategy of drafting in thousands of officers, deploying police horses, setting up massive cordons, and blocking off entire city streets every single weekend, it was incredibly disruptive, insanely expensive, and ultimately it was just totally unsustainable.
And tragically, this strategy of caging people in backfired in the most horrific ways imaginable. Back in 1974, a fatality at Bolton actually prompted the widespread use of those perimeter fences. But by penning human beings in like animals, the police unintentionally created lethal traps. The mid to late 80s saw a devastating string of disasters. At the 1985 Heysel Stadium disaster, a charge by hooligans caused a wall collapse that killed 39 people. And then, the darkest day, the 1989 Hillsborough disaster, where massive overcrowding in those fenced-in pens led to the tragic loss of 97 lives. The blunt force approach wasn't stopping the violence, and worse, the very architecture of containment had become deadly.
Section 3. The Intelligence War, Going Undercover. It was painfully obvious that just throwing thousands of uniformed officers at a stadium wasn't working anymore. The police had to completely pivot. If the hooligans were operating like covert, organized networks, the police realized they had to do exactly the same thing.
Enter the Metropolitan Police's Omega Unit. This was a highly specialized, highly trained squad deployed for one specific purpose: to infiltrate the most notorious football firms in the country. Instead of fighting hooligans face-to-face on the terraces, they decided to dismantle them from the inside out, using deep undercover operations.
And the level of commitment these officers showed was truly staggering.
Take ex-cop Gary Rogers, for example. He spent 6 entire years undercover. He had to create a flawlessly believable alter ego. He literally transformed himself into a 17-stone skinhead. He spent day after day drinking in firm-affiliated pubs, traveling on trains to away games with the mob. He even had to get arrested under his false name multiple times, just to build absolute, unshakable credibility with the gang. These officers were living intense double lives for years, all to figure out exactly who was giving the orders.
The evolution here is wild. The police completely abandoned the archaic tactics. Out went the fencing, the batons, the horses, and the herding. In came intelligence-led policing. The authorities set up a National Football Intelligence Unit, packed with computer databases tracking known offenders. They also started using early CCTV systems to identify troublemakers by their clothes and facial features. They drastically shifted the battleground. It was no longer a physical street fight on match day, it was a psychological, surveillance-based war.
Section 4. The Twist. When the law overreached. Now, history is rarely a straight line of progress, and just when it seemed like the police had finally perfected these modern intelligence tactics, they hit a massive wall. The setting for this enormous twist is the 1988 Intercity Firm trial. The Metropolitan Police had spent years embedding officers deep inside West Ham's feared ICF. They executed massive dawn raids all across London, they held triumphant press conferences, and the headlines basically declared the firm was dead. The police were absolutely convinced they had an unbeatable case that would permanently decapitate the leadership of London's most notorious hooligan network.
But it all fell apart. Why? Well, it came down to immense political pressure from the very top. The government was demanding immediate results, and that forced the police to rush their evidence gathering. During cross-examination in court, a pretty shocking truth came out. It turned out the undercover officers, who were so desperate to secure convictions and appease the politicians, had actually fabricated their statements and falsified evidence. The entire case just collapsed. 15 senior hooligans walked out of that courtroom completely free. It was a deeply humiliating blow to the police, and it sent a very clear message to the subculture. The state's machinery could actually be beaten.
Section 5. Systemic cure or displacement. The aftermath. That massive embarrassment in court, combined with the absolute tragedy of Hillsborough the very next year in 1989, forced a total systemic reset. The authorities realized they couldn't just punch or spy their way out of this problem. They had to actually engineer the violence right out of the sport. The crucial turning point here was the Taylor Report reforms, published in 1990. This was a total game changer for crowd management. First, those lethal perimeter fences were completely torn down, finally ending that dangerous cage mentality. Second, all top-tier stadiums were converted to all-seater venues, which physically prevented the mass surges and stampedes that defined the old terrace culture. And finally, they mandated enhanced high-definition CCTV networks. If you threw a punch or ripped up a seat, you were practically guaranteed to be identified and arrested later. They structurally eliminated the environment where hooliganism thrived. And the legal strategy changed right along with the architecture. 680. That is the number of new football banning orders issued in England and Wales during just the 2022 to 2023 season. By using civil orders instead of criminal trials, the police can now legally ban suspected hooligans from stadiums for up to 10 years. They can even confiscate their passports before international matches. They don't need to meet the high bar of a criminal conviction anymore. Civil exclusion has become the modern weapon of choice.
So, I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on today. With all these modern, all-seater stadiums, strict banning orders, and high-tech cameras watching every move, did the police actually eradicate the English disease, or did they just force it into the shadows? Our sources suggest that while the stadiums themselves have definitely been gentrified and cleansed of the old violence, the underlying subculture hasn't actually vanished. The active firms have just adapted. Today, they're using digital apps to coordinate premeditated fights far, far away from the CCTV cameras, out in remote forests, railway junctions, and empty industrial estates. The arms race between the hooligan and the law is still going strong. The battleground has just moved out of sight. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. If this deep dive sparked your curiosity, make sure to keep questioning the structures around us, and I will catch you next time.